She stood in the marble bathroom of their $40 million penthouse, staring at the bruise blooming across her ribcage. The woman in the mirror was unrecognizable. Hollow eyes. Trembling hands. She'd been wearing long sleeves in summer for 3 years. But tonight, something inside her broke differently. Tonight, she made a decision that would shake one of America's most powerful families to its core. This is the true story of how Caroline Mitchell brought down an empire built on silence. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Caroline was 26 when she met Thomas Ashford at a charity gala in Manhattan. She was working as an event coordinator, clipboard in hand, making sure every detail was perfect. He was 42, recently divorced, and according to Forbes, worth an estimated $3.7 billion. His family's investment firm had been managing generational wealth for America's elite for over 70 years. Thomas was charming that night. He complimented her work ethic. Told her she had kind eyes. Asked if she'd have coffee with him the next morning. Caroline remembers the smell of expensive cologne mixed with champagne. She remembers thinking he seemed lonely despite all that power. She said yes to coffee. Then yes to dinner. Then yes when he proposed 6 months later with a ring that cost more than her childhood home. Looking back, she says the red flags were there from the beginning, but when you're young and someone successful chooses you, you convince yourself you're special. You tell yourself this is love. The wedding was featured in 3 major publications. 250 guests. A dress that took 8 months to design. Caroline's mother cried happy tears. Her father whispered in her ear during their dance that she'd never have to worry about anything again. And for the first few months, it felt like a fairy tale. Thomas bought her anything she wanted. Took her to Paris, to Tokyo, to private islands she didn't know existed. But slowly, so slowly she didn't notice at first, things began to change. It started with small comments. Thomas would mention that her dress was a bit too tight, that maybe she should watch what she ate. He'd suggest she not laugh so loudly at dinners with his business partners. He'd check her phone, casually at first, saying he just wanted to see photos from her day. Caroline brushed it off. Rich people are just particular, she told herself. He has high standards. That's how he became successful. 8 months into their marriage, the first physical incident happened. They were in their bedroom, getting ready for another gala. Caroline had chosen a navy dress. Thomas wanted her in black. The argument escalated. He grabbed her arm hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises. Then he stopped, looked horrified at himself, and broke down crying. He apologized for hours. Bought her a diamond bracelet the next day. Promised it would never happen again. He blamed stress from a failing business deal. Caroline wanted to believe him. She'd made vows. For better or worse. This was just worse, and it would get better. Except it didn't. 3 weeks later, he shoved her against a wall because dinner wasn't ready when he got home. A month after that, he slapped her across the face for contradicting him in front of his mother. Each time, there were tears. Apologies. Expensive gifts. And each time, Caroline felt herself shrinking smaller and smaller. By their second anniversary, Caroline had learned the rules of Thomas's world. Don't speak unless spoken to at business events. Always look perfect but never outshine him. Never, ever question his decisions. She wore makeup to hide occasional bruises. Wore scarves and long sleeves regardless of season. Her friends from before the marriage slowly disappeared. Thomas didn't forbid her from seeing them exactly, but he'd create situations that made it impossible. He'd plan last-minute trips. He'd need her at events. He'd sulk for days if she chose them over him. Eventually, it was easier to just stop trying. Her mother would call, and Caroline would lie. "Everything's wonderful, Mom. We're so happy. Thomas treats me like a queen." The lies tasted like ash in her mouth, but what was the alternative? Admitting she'd made a terrible mistake. Watching her parents' faces fall as their dreams for her shattered. The isolation was suffocating. Caroline lived in a gilded cage with a man who could be tender one moment and terrifying the next. She never knew which version of Thomas would come home. Would he kiss her forehead and ask about her day, or would he criticize everything she'd done and punish her for imagined failures? The unpredictability was its own form of torture. She started having panic attacks in the massive walk-in closet where she'd hide sometimes. Her hands would shake. Her chest would tighten. She'd bite down on a silk scarf to muffle the sound of her crying. Because if Thomas heard her crying, he'd either mock her for being weak or accuse her of trying to manipulate him. There was no winning. There was only surviving. 3 years into the marriage, something happened that changed everything. Caroline was at the penthouse alone, Thomas away on business in London. She'd been cleaning out a drawer in his study, something she rarely did because he was particular about his spaces. Behind a stack of leather-bound notebooks, she found a small key. Curiosity got the better of her. She tried it in various drawers and cabinets until it opened a locked file cabinet she'd never paid attention to. Inside were folders. Dozens of them. And as Caroline began reading, her blood went cold. These were private investigator reports. On her. Dating back to before they'd even met. Thomas had known where she worked, where she lived, her daily routines, her financial struggles. He'd orchestrated their meeting. It wasn't chance. It wasn't fate. It was calculated. But that wasn't even the most disturbing part. There were other folders too. Other women. At least 4 of them, each with similar patterns documented. Photographs of bruises. Hospital records. One folder was labeled with a name Caroline recognized from Thomas's past. His first wife, the one he claimed had left him. According to the documents Caroline was now reading, that woman had filed a police report 5 years ago claiming domestic violence. The case had been dropped after Thomas's lawyers got involved and a substantial settlement was paid. There were photos in that folder too. A woman with a black eye. A split lip. A hospital bracelet visible on her wrist. Caroline sat on the floor of that study for 2 hours, reading through a history of abuse that made her current situation feel part of a horrible pattern. She wasn't special. She wasn't chosen out of love. She was targeted because Thomas had identified her as someone vulnerable enough to control. That night, Caroline didn't sleep. She put everything back exactly as she'd found it, her hands shaking the entire time. Thomas would be home in 2 days. For the first time in 3 years, something other than fear bloomed in her chest. It was rage. Cold, clarifying rage. She'd spent so long blaming herself, wondering what she did wrong, trying to be better, trying to avoid setting him off. But this wasn't about her. This was about him. About a man who enjoyed power and control, who deliberately sought out women he could dominate. How many more would there be if someone didn't stop him? How long before one of his rages went too far and he killed someone? Caroline looked at herself in the bathroom mirror that night, really looked, and made a promise. She was going to get out. And she was going to make sure he couldn't do this to anyone else. But here's the thing about leaving an abuser with unlimited resources. It's not as simple as packing a bag and walking out the door. Thomas had access to the best lawyers in the country. He had connections in law enforcement, in politics, in every system that was supposed to protect people like Caroline. If she just left, he'd find her. If she filed for divorce, he'd bury her in legal proceedings and character assassination. She'd seen the settlement agreements in those folders. Women forced to sign non-disclosure agreements, paid to disappear and stay silent. Caroline needed a plan. A real one. So she started doing something she'd never done before. She started documenting everything. Every time Thomas hurt her, she'd photograph the injuries with time stamps. She bought a small recorder and kept it in her purse, capturing his threats and verbal abuse. She opened a secret email account on a library computer and started sending herself evidence, creating a digital trail he couldn't access. It took 6 months of meticulous, terrifying work. 6 months of continuing to play the obedient wife while quietly building a case against him. There were moments she almost broke. One night, Thomas grabbed her by the throat during an argument about her spending too much time on her phone. He didn't know she was texting a domestic violence counselor, seeking advice. He squeezed until she saw spots, then let go and walked away without a word. Caroline sat on the floor gasping, tears streaming down her face, and almost gave up right then. What was the point? He was too powerful. No one would believe her. But then she thought about those other women in the folders. She thought about the next woman he'd target. She picked herself up. Caroline also did something else during those 6 months. She started secretly meeting with Victoria Chen, a lawyer who specialized in high-profile domestic abuse cases. Victoria took Caroline's case pro bono after hearing her story. Together, they built not just a divorce filing, but a criminal case. Victoria connected Caroline with investigative journalists who'd been trying to expose corruption in wealthy families for years. They were very interested in Thomas Ashford. Turned out, several people in his business circles had suspicions about him, whispers about his temper and his treatment of women, but no one had ever been willing to go on record. Caroline would be the first. The plan was set. They'd file for divorce and simultaneously release a detailed expose of Thomas's pattern of abuse, complete with all the evidence Caroline had gathered plus the historical documentation she'd found in his study. The day Caroline executed the plan was a Tuesday in October. Thomas was at his office, completely unaware. Caroline had packed one suitcase with essentials and left it at Victoria's office the day before. That morning, she woke up in the penthouse for the last time, made Thomas his coffee exactly how he liked it, kissed him goodbye like she had 1,000 times before. He had no idea. At exactly 10 a.m., divorce papers were delivered to his office. At 10:15, the article went live on a major news website. By 10:30, Caroline was in a secure location, surrounded by her legal team, giving an interview to a television journalist. She was terrified. Her voice shook. But she told her story. She showed the photographs of bruises, played audio recordings of Thomas screaming at her, threatening her. She presented the evidence of his pattern with other women. The response was immediate and massive. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Social media exploded. Other women started coming forward with their own stories about Thomas Ashford. Not just romantic partners, but employees, business associates, women who'd experienced his rage and cruelty in different contexts. The family investment firm went into crisis mode. Thomas's lawyer released a statement calling Caroline a liar and a gold digger. They threatened legal action for defamation. But here's what Thomas and his expensive legal team didn't count on: Caroline had been extremely careful. Everything she presented was documented and verifiable. The truth is a powerful defense against defamation claims. And the court of public opinion was turning against Thomas fast. Several major clients pulled their accounts from his firm. Business partners distanced themselves. The brand his family had built over 70 years was crumbling in real time. Thomas tried everything. He had his people dig into Caroline's past, looking for anything to discredit her. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. He offered her money to recant, first 10 million, then 20, then 50. She refused every offer. This wasn't about money. This was about making sure he faced consequences for the first time in his privileged life. He sent messages through intermediaries, sometimes threatening, sometimes pleading. Caroline ignored all of it. She was done being manipulated. She was done being afraid. For the first time in years, she was sleeping through the night. Not easily, not without nightmares, but she was free from the constant terror of wondering what mood he'd be in when he walked through the door. The legal process took 18 months. During that time, Caroline lived modestly in an apartment paid for by the proceeds from selling jewelry Thomas had given her. She started therapy, really confronting the trauma of what she'd endured. She reconnected with old friends, rebuilt relationships she'd thought were lost forever. She started painting again, something she'd loved before Thomas but had given up because he said it was a waste of time. Slowly, piece by piece, she reclaimed herself. The divorce was finalized on a rainy morning in April. Caroline got a fair settlement, not because Thomas was generous, but because his lawyers knew if it went to trial, the additional publicity would destroy what little remained of his reputation. More importantly, criminal charges were filed. Thomas Ashford was charged with assault, criminal threatening, and harassment based on Caroline's evidence. It was the first time in his life he had to stand in a courtroom as a defendant. The trial was a media sensation. Caroline testified for 6 hours over 2 days, recounting in painful detail the years of abuse. Thomas's lawyers tried to paint her as vindictive, as someone who'd enjoyed the lifestyle and now wanted revenge. But the evidence was overwhelming. Hospital records, photographs, audio recordings, testimony from other victims. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before finding Thomas Ashford guilty on multiple counts. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison and 5 years of probation. For a man who'd never faced real consequences for anything, who'd used wealth and power to escape accountability his entire life, it was devastating. His business never recovered. The investment firm was eventually sold. The Ashford name, once synonymous with prestige and success, became synonymous with abuse and scandal. But here's what matters more than Thomas's downfall. Caroline's courage inspired dozens of other women to come forward about their own experiences with powerful abusers. Her case became a blueprint for how to document abuse and build a legal strategy against someone with unlimited resources. She started a foundation that provides legal support and safe housing for domestic violence survivors leaving wealthy abusers. Because she learned firsthand that all the shelters and resources are designed for women without means, but women married to billionaires face unique challenges. They need lawyers who can go up against elite legal teams. They need security because their abusers can hire people to find them. They need support that understands the complex psychological manipulation that comes with that specific dynamic. 5 years after leaving Thomas, Caroline spoke at a conference for domestic violence advocates. She talked about how abuse doesn't discriminate based on bank account balances. How living in a penthouse doesn't hurt less than living in a studio apartment when someone you love is hurting you. How the shame and isolation can be even worse when everyone assumes you have a perfect life. She talked about the importance of believing survivors, even when their abuser seems charming and successful to the outside world. Especially then. Because abusers don't abuse everyone. They're often charismatic, respected, powerful people in public. That's how they get away with it for so long. Who would believe that the philanthropist, the successful businessman, the man who donates millions to charity, goes home and terrorizes his wife? Caroline made people believe. And in doing so, she gave permission to countless other women to speak their truth too. Today, Caroline lives quietly. She never remarried, though she's dated and has healthy relationships in her life. She says she's not opposed to marriage again someday, but she's learned to be happy on her own first. She's learned that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who makes you feel worthless. She has a small circle of trusted friends. She still paints, and some of her work hangs in galleries now. She volunteers regularly at domestic violence shelters, talking to women who are where she once was, offering hope that escape is possible. She's written a book about her experience that became a bestseller, with all proceeds going to her foundation. She's turned her worst experience into purpose. That's not to say it was worth it. She'll tell you plainly that she wishes none of it had happened. That she has scars, physical and emotional, that will never fully heal. That there are still nights she wakes up in a panic, forgetting for a moment that she's safe now. Thomas got out of prison after serving 2 years of his sentence. He's living in Florida now, reportedly working for a friend's company in a much diminished capacity. His net worth has decreased substantially. He's not destitute by any means, but he'll never have the power and prestige he once did. He's required to attend anger management and therapy as part of his probation. Caroline doesn't keep tabs on him. She's moved on. But she hopes, for the sake of any woman who might cross his path, that he's actually done the work to change. Though she's realistic about the likelihood. Men like Thomas rarely change fundamentally. They just get better at hiding, or they lose enough that they can't attract new victims. That's a dark truth about abuse. We want to believe everyone can be redeemed, but some people are only as good as their circumstances force them to be. So let me ask you something. How do you feel about Caroline's story? Could you have found the courage to document evidence for 6 months while still living with your abuser, never knowing if he'd discover what you were doing? Can you imagine the strength it took to stand up in court and tell the world the most humiliating, painful details of your private life? And what about the women who came before Caroline, the ones who took settlements and signed non-disclosure agreements and disappeared? Do you judge them for not fighting the way she did, or do you understand that everyone's survival looks different? These are complicated questions without easy answers. Abuse is complicated. Leaving is complicated. Justice is complicated. But one thing isn't complicated: believing survivors when they tell you someone hurt them. That part should be simple. Caroline's case also raises bigger questions about wealth and accountability. How many powerful men are getting away with abuse right now because their victims know the system is rigged against them? How many women are suffering in silence behind the gates of mansions, convinced no one will believe them because their abuser is respected and successful? The truth is, we live in a society that often values power and money over justice and safety. Thomas Ashford's lawyers tried every trick to discredit Caroline. They had unlimited resources to drag out proceedings, to make her life difficult, to exhaust her emotionally and financially. If she hadn't found Victoria Chen, if she hadn't had the support of journalists and advocates who worked for free because they believed in her cause, would she have gotten justice? Probably not. And that should disturb all of us. Justice shouldn't be something only people with resources can access. Think about what it means that Caroline had to become a detective in her own abuse case. That she had to risk her safety for 6 months, carefully gathering evidence while continuing to live with someone who could have killed her if he discovered what she was doing. That she couldn't just go to the police and expect to be believed and protected. She needed recordings. Photographs. Documentation. A paper trail. Because without overwhelming evidence, it would have been her word against a billionaire's. And we all know who usually wins that battle. This is the reality for abuse survivors, especially those trapped with powerful partners. The system that's supposed to protect them often fails them. They have to protect themselves, which requires resources and knowledge many don't have. Caroline was lucky in some ways. She was college-educated. She had the intelligence and determination to build a case. She found the right lawyer at the right time. She had journalists willing to tell her story. But what about the women who don't have those advantages? What about the woman married to a powerful man in a small town where his family controls everything? What about the immigrant woman whose abuser threatens deportation if she speaks up? What about the woman whose abuser is a cop, or a judge, or someone deeply embedded in the very system meant to help her? Caroline's victory is inspiring, but it also highlights how broken the system is. One woman shouldn't have to be extraordinarily brave and strategic to escape abuse and see her abuser face consequences. That should be the baseline, not the exception. In the years since Caroline's case, there have been some changes. Several states have strengthened laws around coercive control, recognizing that abuse isn't just physical violence but also psychological manipulation and isolation. Some courts now receive better training on domestic violence dynamics. There's more public awareness that abuse happens across all socioeconomic levels. Caroline's foundation has helped fund these initiatives, turning her personal experience into systemic change. But there's so much work left to do. Every day, women are being hurt by partners who know they can get away with it. Every day, survivors are weighing whether speaking up is worth the retaliation they'll face. Every day, justice is delayed or denied because someone has enough money to manipulate the system. Here's what Caroline wants people to understand: if you're in an abusive relationship, it's not your fault. You didn't cause it. You can't fix it by being better or more understanding or more careful. Abuse is a choice the abuser makes. And you deserve help, safety, and support regardless of your circumstances. If you're wealthy and being abused, your experience is valid even though you have material comfort. The bruises hurt the same. The fear is just as real. Don't let anyone tell you that you should be grateful or that you have it easy. Abuse is abuse. And if you know someone being abused, believe them. Don't wait for proof. Don't question why they haven't left. Just believe them and offer support. Sometimes that belief is the lifeline someone needs to start planning their escape. Caroline also wants people to know that leaving is the most dangerous time. Statistically, women are most likely to be killed by their abusers when they try to leave or shortly after leaving. That's why safety planning is crucial. That's why sometimes women stay longer than outsiders think they should, because they're trying to leave in a way that won't get them killed. It's easy to judge from the outside, to say you'd never stay with someone who hurt you. But until you've been systematically broken down, isolated from support systems, convinced that no one will believe you or help you, made financially dependent, threatened with violence if you leave, you don't know what you'd do. Caroline thought she'd never be that woman either. Then she was. And she clawed her way out. But she doesn't judge the women who are still there, still trying to survive. She just offers them hope that escape is possible. The last time I spoke with Caroline for this story, she said something that stuck with me. She said that for years after leaving Thomas, she struggled with feeling like she'd wasted her 20s on him. Like those years were lost, stolen, meaningless. But she's made peace with it now. Those years taught her strength she didn't know she had. They taught her empathy for suffering she might never have understood otherwise. They gave her purpose. She wouldn't choose to go through it again, but she's no longer ashamed of it. It happened. It's part of her story. And she's used it to help hundreds of other women write different endings to their stories. That's not nothing. That's everything. So as we close this story, think about the Carolines in your life. The woman who seems to have it all together but whose smile doesn't quite reach her eyes anymore. The friend who's slowly disappeared from social gatherings. The coworker who's always making excuses for her partner's behavior. The family member wearing long sleeves in summer. Pay attention. Ask questions. Create space for truth-telling. And if someone trusts you enough to reveal they're being hurt, believe them. Help them. Connect them with resources. Don't try to rescue them or make decisions for them, but walk alongside them as they find their own path to safety.